if you're a new entrant, there's allowances for that you don't have to see through kind of a period of 5 years. So you're actually allowed, if you can kind of show that you are a new entrant, and you want to plant some trees, that can be taken into account as well.
It's great to be back with another Environment Edge podcast, and you're very welcome to the show. Do you know what schemes and rates are available to landowners under the forestation scheme, with 12 different forest scheme options available?
And who is eligible to apply, and what are the conditions? Francis McHugh, Teagasc Forestry Specialist, joins us to discuss.
I'm Cathal Summers.
And I'm Deirdre Glenn,
your Teagasc Sustainability Advisors. And we're back for another Environment Edge podcast number 99, and here we go.
Francis, you're really welcome to the show. I was looking at the vision for the forestry, and it says the right tree in the right place for the right reason. And I thought that was very symbolic. I really like that vision. Under the afforestation scheme, what do you think? What's it all about, and what are its aims?
Yeah, and like, it is funny you should say that in terms of the right tree in the right place, because that sounds simple enough, So it can be complicated enough. Yeah, exactly. We have we have a very diverse landscape, and unfortunately we don't have a huge amount of forestry in that landscape. We've around 11% of the forest area at the moment, and that, I suppose, in comparison to the rest of Europe, maybe the average would be over 30%. So there is a job of work, I suppose, for lots of different reasons to increase the amount of forestry in Ireland, and that's where the forestry programme is there and has been there, I suppose, for the last couple of decades. So really, it's to work, I suppose, work hard at, I suppose, incorporating trees and forestry into the landscape and making good decisions around that, finding the landowners who want to do it, finding the land that's suitable, and and overall, I suppose, to kind of meet government policy as well. So maybe sounds simple, but there's a lot of work there and a lot of decision making, a lot of discussions to be had, I suppose, to achieve that.
There's so many different schemes available to the farmers. Like, I think it's something like 12 different schemes. I don't know how you do your job at all, Francis, with all the figures and the facts all around it. But with that in mind, do you think, is it possible for us to reach the 18% target? Or are there obstacles still in the way of meeting that target?
Yeah, like, as the forestry program has evolved, I suppose it has got a lot more. I suppose you could use lots of different words, but you could say a lot more diverse, a lot more interesting. You could say a little bit more complicated as well. So that's where the challenges come in. So again, it's kind of matching in that area. So, like, in the early days of the forestry program, we would have had pretty much, commercial forestry for timber in mind when we talk about, when we think or talk about forestry. So that's, that option is certainly front and center and is still there within the forestry program, but it is, I suppose, surrounded by other forestry options as well. So you're right, there's 12 different forest types. But I think that's brilliant to give, I suppose, forestry advisors and foresters, choice and something to discuss, and really to kind of understand where forest owners or landowners initially are, and what their objectives might be. And you can kind of combine some of these forest types, going from native woodland to, agroforestry, to continuous cover forestry, to high forest, main leaf spruce. So you can get that combination and match the landowner and the land with particular forest types. So I think it has become more interesting, a little bit more complicated, but I think if you want to do something right, you need to kind of work a little bit hard to get the combination right.
If some of our viewers are sitting at home, Francis, at the moment, and they're saying to themselves, I think you mentioned our second hole, you have to want a forest. I think often foresters say to me, it's not something you should shove down someone's throat. So you have to want to put a forest in, and like a forest, and want it on your land. And I think lots of landowners and farmers do want that, be it at a small part of the land or a big part of the land. But if some of our viewers at home now wondering about, am I eligible? It could be a farmer, it could be someone that owns 2 acres, could be a company with 5 acres out the back of the company. What is the criteria for complying or getting into the forestry scheme?
Well, for the person, I suppose first, I suppose we have the person and we have the land as well. So for the person, there's fairly basic criteria. You need to be over 18. You have to have a PPS number, or you can be actually a company as well. You need to either own, lease, or be in joint management of that piece of ground. So you have to be able to demonstrate to the department that you have the right, I suppose, to make a decision on this kind of pretty major change of land use. So that's the person. The land then is another aspect, I suppose, in terms of qualification. And there is a process, there is a licensing process in relation to getting approval for a forest, and that's something that a landowner undertakes with a registered forester. So there is a requirement there to engage a forester that has been registered with the department to come out to chat to them, work through, I suppose, what might suit the land, what sort of environmental issues may need to be taken into account, and then to kind of again plan that forest accordingly. And that application goes into the Department of Agriculture. If it needs to be referred to outside bodies, that happens maybe to fisheries or archaeology or different processes like that. That's done kind of within the department, that the applicant doesn't have to go running with a piece of paper to different bodies or anything. The department look after that. But there can be a little bit of a wait then to kind of get through that process, and then the license hopefully is issued then. That system has improved over the years. There has been a lot of, regulation that has come quite quickly for forestry, and that the department now are fully au fait with all those, and those things are worked through pretty quickly. And the forester often, I suppose, plans that forest with all those regulations in mind, and hopefully then that means that application goes through the system, and a forest appropriate to that site and to the owner. Hopefully that's the main aim at the end, to get that established.
And you don't need a herd number, then anybody can really apply as long as you have the land.
Yeah, no, you don't have to be a farmer per se. Now there is, I suppose, an incentive there for farmers that the premium is the same rate for everybody, but it's 20 years for farmers and 15 years for non-farmers. So essentially there used to be all sorts of definitions of farming, and I suppose there still is across farming and different schemes. But at the moment for forestry then, you basically have to be an approved participant in BIS, in the year of application, but also in the previous 4 years. So it just kind of shows that you've been an established farmer for that amount of time. That's kind of the basic requirement. If you're a new entrant, there's allowances for that you don't have to see through kind of a period of 5 years. So you're actually allowed, if you can kind of show that you are a new entrant, and you want to plant some trees, that can be taken into account as well.
You just want to see that you're invested in the land, I suppose,
Exactly, yeah, that
Yeah.
that with that farmer rate, there has to be a kind of some sort of a rule of thumb in terms of, and it is, we all know, how do you define a farmer? It's always something that comes and goes with lots of different schemes, but that's the one. I suppose it's simple enough in relation to forestry this time around.
You'd have to wait for approval as well, wouldn't you, Francis, before you'd...
Absolutely, yeah, that's the same, I presume, for most schemes.
Yeah.
That you and even the temptation, I suppose, if there is some sort of a prep work and fencing and things, the temptation would be to kind of to get
Yeah.
going, when conditions are right or whatever. But no, it's absolutely essential that people would wait for that approval. So it's kind of a two-stage approval, that you get kind of a technical approval first to kind of say, well, yes, in theory, this, in terms of all the environmental regulations and everything, you're good to go, and then you're asked then to kind of apply for the actual funding then, and that's pretty quick then.
I think the big fear from people is the paperwork. Nobody likes paperwork, but I think from dealing with yourselves, often if a farmer asks me about forestry, I'll send them a number of one of your colleagues, but I think a lot of the hassle is taken out of it once you engage with an advisor or a forester, isn't it?
I think so, and really, we would, from a Teagasc point of view, we would really encourage people to make that, I suppose, appointment with a forestry advisor to come in and chat, because it's, we're all foresters, and but a lot of the conversation isn't about trees. It's about how forestry, fits into an existing farming system, and I think it's really important to just to kind of get a picture of that and an understanding, and again, to kind of tease out the objectives of the forest owner, because sometimes if a forester comes out, and obviously they're doing their job very well in kind of matching the site, in terms of species and everything. But it's really important to kind of have that thinking done initially to kind of, well, why am I doing this? What are my objectives? What are my expectations? What are the timescales here? Who's it for? Is it for myself or the people coming after me? So that takes a little bit of a teasing out, and it's sometimes hard to have that conversation when you're literally walking across the field with a measuring tape or just to kind of planning the logistics on the ground. So we certainly would encourage people to come to us every year. We have our clinics, and we in January and February we had them this year. Over 300 people sat down with us individually to have that chat with us, and I think the feedback is very positive. That just to kind of get that greater understanding of how forestry works.
Brilliant. And I think as a group, you're very, very approachable as well. Having met you at events and discussion groups, and you're very, very much on the ground and very, very visible as a group of specialists and advisors, which is fantastic within the organisation as well. You mentioned environmental considerations, and they're integrated into the afforestation scheme. So I was looking it up, and if you wanted to get over 50 hectares, if a farmer wants to plant over 50 hectares, they have to get an environmental assessment done. Is that a big procedure, or will it cost them a lot of money? Or
there's no two ways about it. It would be a big procedure, and to be honest, it's rarely done. I mean, 50 hectares of forestry is huge,
massive, yeah.
And it rarely would be done especially in any one go. So certainly that probably does provide a little bit of a ceiling in terms of it isn't a maximum area allowed, but I think very, very few people would undertake that environmental impact assessment. So kind of coming back from that, then there certainly are areas where, forestry is basically not, it's just unlikely to happen. On peat soils now, we know that even though so maybe we have to remind ourselves how beneficial trees are to the environment, but yet if we, I suppose, plant trees where it affects, the water table in a bog, for example, that's not going to have a positive effect environmentally. So, those things have evolved over time. The knowledge has evolved and is getting, much, much better now. So we know, as I said, we have a very diverse landscape. So we know where trees will benefit the surrounding area, and then areas where we need to just step back a little bit from and just make better decisions. So that, as I said, has evolved over time, and those environmental regulations take all that into account. There are areas where, very sensitive areas in relation to, say, breeding waders, areas where we know that if we put in trees there, that, if there are habitats there already, those type of birds specifically will not appreciate the change in landscape. So again, it doesn't rule out forestry necessarily, but it certainly means that a good look is and a proper assessment is made of that area, and a decision kind of how to design a forest, or what you should plant, or what type of trees, what setback areas. So that's, as you can kind of maybe get from that, there's a little bit of thought, or maybe a lot of thought in relation to that, and that's how that kind of that process happens to get that final decision about planting trees and where they go.
BIS and acres and organics, all of these schemes have taken into consideration, the afforestation scheme, and
Yeah,
there's plenty of leeway with those schemes to incorporate forestry during the duration of them as well.
yeah, there has been a lot of work done on that over the years, and really it's I suppose not helpful where schemes kind of compete, or
Yeah.
even is perceived to compete, even is enough to kind of at least confuse people, but maybe put people off as well. So in terms of the BIS scheme, if there has been a BIS payment established on that, or basic payment over the years, chances are that will continue for your forestry. So you'd get your BIS payment and your forestry payment. I'd have to go down through individually the terms and conditions. I suppose there are, certain things to take into account, and we certainly would encourage people to make sure with their forestry advisor or their agricultural advisor that that's all okay and set up. But I suppose the basic rule is that there has been an established BIS payment coming on that land, and that the applicant It's the same applicant basically for the forestry application and the BIS applicant. So they're the kind of the two keen areas. But I certainly would encourage people just to double check that, specifically for their own site.
It's a concern for people, so it's important one to cover. So
Oh,
just
it's really
on that,
important.
yeah, and like landowners are always worried they're going to lose money and stuff. So I think yeah, it's really important you highlighted that. Just so you mentioned 12 schemes. What are the big ones, or the most common ones people take up, and maybe give us a flavor of the type of money we can expect from them. If you have a potential, money always perks up the years, so.
Oh no, it's important, and I suppose that's why there's a forestry program there. And yet, and I think you alluded to there a few minutes ago that there's no point in just going for forestry just because there's a scheme, that you need to want to do it as well. But certainly the scheme is an essential element. So we mentioned that these 12 forest types. So they run, I suppose, the ones that came out most frequently in our recent clinics would be native forests, and that certainly has been an increase in the last few years. And incorporated into that, then the forest for water. So that would be a native forest beside water, and there's a little extra incentive there. So just to give you an idea of the grant to cover the cost of planting and the fencing and everything really to do on the site. The grant there in that situation would be €6,744 per hectare. So that's money to spend over a 4-year period to get those trees planted, protected, and up and running for to get them established. The premium then, which is the income from that forest for, as I said, for the farmer rate of premium for 20 years, is €1,103 per hectare per year for those 20 years. So another popular one then would be the agroforestry, which again is it's quite a different forest, and it's relatively new, and a lot of people love the idea of that kind of intimate combination of trees and being allowed or being facilitated to farm as well on the same piece of ground. So instead of planting around 2,500 trees per hectare, you're maybe planting around 400 trees per hectare. And because of that, you can protect those trees individually and allow either maybe grass to grow, or there's actually a silvo arable, where you could actually put an arable crop in there as well instead. So that has become a lot more, I suppose, popular, and there's an agroforestry forum now, an organization that is working hard to kind of, to get people that are interested in agroforestry together and to kind of compare the successes, I suppose, of that as well. So people are interested in that one. It certainly ties in agroforestry in particular with the organic scheme, where you can actually still claim the organic payment on agroforestry land. So essentially, you may be getting your BIS payment, your BIS payment, your agroforestry premium, and also the organic payment as well. So that's a really positive incentive there, and a real example of how different schemes can actually work together. And then, of course, not forgetting the high forest, the mixed commercial forest, which we certainly need as well. We need timber to feed into our sawmilling industry, and to capture carbon. They're our fast growing conifers. They're absolutely amazing at grabbing carbon out of the atmosphere, and they do that really, really well. So if we store that timber in buildings, that's a really positive thing for the environment. But I think the variety that we have now in the forestry program, kind of shows and demonstrates the diversity that we really do need across our forests. It's never going to be one thing, but a combination within our landscape. I think it's going to be positive.
Yeah, a lot of those forests as well, the conifers, the one that we put into timber products again, there is a percentage of those in native species as
Yeah.
well, isn't there? It's changed a lot in the last
Absolutely,
number
yeah.
of
So you're
years.
talking about you have to have 20% broadleaf. So that's, if you've absolutely just a commercial, I suppose, objective in your mind, that's a lot, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
Um, but it is important, that again that has evolved over time, and that requirement is there to ensure that we have a diverse forest across the country.
And we do need timber, especially with the amount of houses being built at the moment. We have to have timber coming in all the time. Growing
Certainly, yeah, yeah.
population. Yeah.
And the closer we to home we can have that timber, the better environmentally, and obviously for the economy as well.
Francis, can you tell us a little bit about the native tree schemes?
Yeah, so I suppose as an add-on to the forestry program now, there's what's called a native tree area scheme. So it's a really interesting little scheme where people can plant up to 1 hectare of native trees without the need for that licensing system that we talked about there. Um, so it just means that you know, plenty of farms have areas where they may not want to plant hectares and hectares, but they might have a corner that might suit. And the grants are very good. The grant itself is similar to the main forestry program, €6,744 for that hectare. But the premium then is paid out €2,206 for that hectare. So that's paid over a period of 10 years instead of 20. So it's a kind of you get the premium, a larger premium for a shorter amount of time. But again, as I said, it's something that you can check with your forestry advisor or your forester because it's done on the kind of a mapping. So if you're maybe if there's an archaeological site nearby, you won't be able to go in. You'll have to still go in through the licenses system. But if you're in an area where it doesn't have environmental, I suppose, restrictions in any way, you're good to go. It takes a very, very quick turnaround for an application because it doesn't have to go through that bigger process. And it's a way to kind of get involved in planting trees at a kind of a smaller scale.
It's very achievable for most farmers then.
Oh, it is, and I certainly would encourage people just to have a look at it, even if they've kind of maybe kind of discounted forestry as a kind of for other people. This is a way to maybe have a little look and say, well, maybe I could do this.
And you're saying that that hectare doesn't have to be all into one area, that can be split up, can it?
It doesn't. Like I suppose the practicality is if you divide it up too much, it's just going to be too costly
Yeah.
and kind of more difficult to manage. But certainly in theory, like you can actually divide it into like different 0.1 of a hectares, in different areas. So there is leeway there. And you can actually either plant a little small woodland or a narrow strip along a river is another element to that as well. So again, if you have a river and are willing to maybe plant a few rows of native trees back from the river, that qualifies as well for that scheme.
We're probably coming close to the end there, Francis, but I know you have a couple of things coming up that you wanted to mention.
Yeah, so I suppose everybody's probably familiar with the fact that we had a lot of after Storm Eowyn and Storm Dara as well, and there was a lot of damage to forests. So we have these storms every so often, and this time round it was unprecedented, really, the amount of damage it has caused. So there's a lot of timber on the ground in some areas of the country, and there's a job of work to recover that timber, and there's a lot of timber that will be harvested. So we have a few events coming up just to support forest owners, just to kind of get organised, and they're probably selling timber a lot sooner than they expected, to be honest. So on April the 1st and April the 8th, we have two events, one in Mount Bellew and the other in Castlerea, and they're outdoor events where we have live harvesting of storm damaged timber, and hopefully that will be of help to people. On the 15th of April, then we have our Talking Timber event, which is an annual event on marketing conifer timber, and it certainly will have a theme about post-storm conifer marketing as well. So just all the details are on our website on teagasc.ie/forestry. It does require each of those events need registration, so we'll just ask people to maybe register for those events and get their name down, and the more they're welcome to come along.
That's super. And I think, look, it's clear there's lots of opportunity for forestry in Ireland at the moment. We need more forestry, and there's lots of farms that we visit that there's plenty of room to put a bid on if you want. The one thing I remember being at a forestry event a couple of years ago, and their farmer was the greatest salesman for forestry I ever saw. Somebody asked them, why did you put forestry in the farm? And they said, well, I don't have to feed them on a Saturday and Sunday.
Yeah.
So that won the room straight away. So thanks a million, Francis. Really appreciate you coming on today and for filling us in and updating us on the schemes available. And hopefully you'll see plenty of landowners and farmers put more forests on the farm in the future. Thanks a million.
Thank you.
So there you have it. Tune in next time to hear more interesting chats and discussion.
Myself and Deirdre will be back in 2 weeks' time, but do give us a review on Apple and Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening to the Environment Edge podcast.